On Monday, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis announced proposals aimed at taking down environmental social governance, also known as ESG, in the Sunshine State, further cementing his anti-elites crusade. While speaking at an event last night, the Yale undergraduate Harvard Law graduate said, quote, "We will be standing up for folks in Daytona and Destin, not following the elites in Davos."
DeSantis wants to ban ESG banking, which basically implements a requirement that says investors need to consider the 3 pillars of ESG when choosing whether they want to invest in a community or project. The Florida governor has consistently fought this idea because he and critics alike say it is chock full of woke political ideology. DeSantis' latest criticisms of elites comes weeks after policymakers and CEOs from around the globe met in Davos, Switzerland to discuss geopolitical risks like inflation, food insecurities, climate crises, and of course disinformation and how best to fight it. And ESG is a very popular idea among kind of the Davos elite. This idea that investing and business needs to follow these principles of environmental concern and equity and sustainability, and which I don't have a problem necessarily with that, but they really want to code it into law so that you're not allowed to do business unless you have a stated commitment to these things. Some of these will be fine commitments that businesses should make. There needs to be some regulations, I guess. But my worry, and the worry a lot of people who are skeptical of ESG would have, is that it's going to look like exactly what I talked about in my radar, the disinformation creep, where you're no longer allowed to do business if you have expressed any harmful, toxic political ideas. You're not going to be allowed to have a bank account if you're someone who said something uncomfortable on Twitter. You're not going to be able to do Airbnb or Uber. How the kind of social credit score idea is seeping very slowly and very gradually due to COVID, due to disinformation, the way that elites are choosing to weaponize these policies against ordinary people.
Yeah, I mean, look, there used to be a time in America, in the corporate world, where CEOs self-censored, like self-applied these standards for corporate governance. They weren't outside regulations, and there was an understanding that comes from the founding, the original, evolution of a corporate charter in the United States, that the government grants your ability to corporation. It's a right that stems from the government in the first instance, because there was an understanding that in order to have progress on certain projects, you needed to raise large amounts of money that were potentially outside of the government's control to build bridges, roads, et cetera, and that it was a public good. And for that reason, the government was to allow people to incorporate and raise these large funds that could potentially have anti-democratic effects. That's what the Founding Fathers were so concerned about. Are you going to empower this alternative government that has no democratic oversight whatsoever? But they say, we'll let you do these limited charters, et cetera, et cetera. Now, obviously, corporations have grown. Their power has extended over the years. And even from the mid part of the last century to now, CEOs' idea of what their responsibility is to the public has diminished dramatically. And along with that, we've seen, for example, the gap between CEO pay and worker pay go from something like 30 to 1 in the mid part of the last century to over 300 to 1 now. And in fact, I think there's been a lot of public pushback against what the role of corporations are. We talked earlier in the day about this horrible train derailment in southern Ohio that it has the fingerprints of corporate malfeasance all over it, a lack of oversight, cutting corners, poor treatment of workers who are taxed with this oversight, et cetera. And so much so that I think 2 years ago, I think it was around 2019 in the context, it was around the time the Bernie campaign was going, Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan, came out with this statement saying, okay, yeah, corporations should have a little bit more responsibility, because I think they were getting so much heat for having so much in the way of profit and returning so little to the public. So there's this delicate balance. I think corporate CEOs understand that they exist at the grace of both the workforce and the government, who fundamentally do have the ability to extend certain privileges or not to corporations. And the question really becomes, do we think it's a good thing? I understand that things can be biased in what ESG actually means or whether it's like woke or not. I think that is obscuring that there's real exploitation happening here. There's price gouging we talked about in our inflation segment that's going on here. There is poor treatment of staff that is happening here. There is wage theft that's happening here. And at what point are efforts to cast equity measures as wokeism ultimately obscuring the extent to which these are worker-centered policies that Republicans are trying to undermine, or conservatives are trying to undermine?
Well, I mean, the media is then playing right into their hands by being totally supportive of efforts to stigmatize and ostracize and prevent from participating in economic life people who dissent on vaccines and other subjects, which has allowed, maybe cynically from your view, but has allowed Republicans to capitalize on policies that probably the left would feel are harmful to workers, but many of these the actual workers feel that media elites and the Democratic Party are not representing them because they've got on board with policies that they've said it's like a matter of democracy surviving, that people are stigmatized and forced not to participate, not to have bank accounts, not be able to work, not be able to drive a truck, not be able to open a business for having opinions that fall outside, again, the mainstream consensus, even if the opinions themselves are actually not fringe at all, are held by millions of people.
I think a lot of the COVID policies really were a miscalculation. Yes. I am also fearful, however, that, I hear woke. I don't even know what we're talking about at some point. Like, can we just be a little bit more specific? Because what I'm very concerned about is not woke elites woke. We see how flexible these categories are when, I'm sorry, Ron DeSantis, who graduated from Yale undergrad and Harvard Law, is walking around using terms like elites. Well, what do we actually mean? You're the governor of a state. Is that kind of elite? And is the issue not your elite position, but whether or not you are standing in line with the interests of people who have less privilege and power than you do? Okay, so are the policies you're criticizing as elite, is it a problem because the person has the same pedigree as you? Or is the issue that they are actually doing things that are antithetical to the interests of working people? And if it's the latter, I'm right there with you, Ron DeSantis. But what we're getting out of a lot of this woke, elite language is obscuring the reality that corporations absolutely should be more accountable to the workforce that makes them so rich in the first place. Corporations absolutely need to be more accountable and pay their taxes and not have people who are the billionaire CEOs like Jeff Bezos paying less in taxes than their private secretaries are paying.
But are the policies being proposed at Davos going to make the corporate, the corporate leaders are the ones attending Davos.
No,
so it's not going to make them more accountable. It's making the workers more accountable to elite opinion.
Yeah, I absolutely am not defending Davos, and anything coming out of Davos I'm highly skeptical of, because again, we saw this with SBF. Mm-hmm. Over and over again, philanthropy in the hands of the richest people in the world is only used as a pretext to disguise the extent to which they're fleecing the rest of us. Look over here, I have a philanthropic organization, I'm such a good guy, while over here I'm doing a high-end Ponzi scheme that ultimately has landed him in jail. So I completely agree. The Davos focus, that kind of elite focus, I think is good because it is ultimately the power that's at issue at Davos. The sheer implications of having that much aggregated wealth and what people do with it politically to frankly undermine democracy is a closed book. That's not really for argument. I'm a little wary of like shoehorning this into this like greater issue about wokeness and identity. I'm telling you, some random black person somewhere, some random Latino who cares about their identity and wants not to be marginalized on those lines has nothing to do with a bunch of frankly predominantly white elites in Davos trying to rig corporations and their corporate law and et cetera in their favor.
I don't know what
so why are we talking about wokeness and elitism?
Well,
is too broad a term.
They're
that is
certainly
bringing in too many people.
They're imperfect terms, but we kind of know what we're talking about when we use it.
We don't. And the people who coin these terms, people like Christopher Rufo, are very explicit about how they are advantaged by the slippage that occurs by using those kind of vague terms. He doesn't hide the ball. I actually respect that he's so open about what his agenda is. And it's the same thing with a lot of these parents' rights as a umbrella term that is used to advance agendas that parents, when asked about the agenda specifically, often don't agree with. And the people over at the Citations podcast did a great episode on this recently, that the parents' rights was a rallying cry back in the 90s. Every time there's an agenda item that Republicans know doesn't actually poll very well, everyone wants parents to have rights, right? So you frame it as that, and then we don't have to talk about book burning, not burning, but excluding hundreds of books from shelves. Republicans are now being asked to justify taking various titles out of circulation that are so plainly like patriotic texts and like the kind of thing that everybody likes and agrees with. And now they're having to deal with the political consequences of being the people who wanted to ban that kind of material. I mean, I think we saw that in midterms.
You're talking for the ban on pornographic books in schools?
No, I think that it would be nice if you pretended that that's what the only thing that got banned. You really think that Robbie, look, this is it right here. Do you think that I, Brianna Joy Gray, think that there should be pornography in schools?
No.
No, but it's a cheap trick, because what we're really talking about is whether Alice Walker's The Color Purple can be read in school or not.
That's literally what got banned, was those things.
Okay,
and
well, nobody's
gave
complaining
guidance to shut down, but like that was not what it called for.
No, so you're arguing that there was like a Hustler magazine in somebody's preschool, and that parents are objecting to the Hustler magazine being taken out of school?
We know specifically what the texts are. It's that it's a very sexually, it's a book with sexually graphic pictures. You know the one I'm talking about.
I don't.
Well, that's the one they objected to.
Nobody is actually talking about these. Look, if there is some material that there's a consensus among parents that should be taken out of school,
that's
fine.
Exactly the case.
But that's not the point, Robbie. The point is that hundreds of books, including 47 math books in the state of Florida have been banned. Now, I have spoken, wait a minute. I have spoken to teachers, math teachers in Florida, about how this is negatively impacting their ability to teach children. That is a true fact. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the day, take whatever book out, have a narrowly constrained law that's tailored to get what is actually objectionable material out of the classroom. Don't use it as a pretext by saying woke, woke, woke. You're justifying banning hundreds of other texts.
I think that's exactly what they did. They did not ban hundreds of other texts. They don't want you to have these specific texts, and then teachers have reacted to this advice by shutting down their entire personal libraries, which I agree is bad, and to be clear, I probably would have done this specific law in the first place for exactly this reason. But I think it's misleading to say that the state of Florida ordered math books taken down.
They literally have a list of 40-odd math books. That is literally what happened. And additionally, over 170 books total have been banned from Florida libraries following these new education guidelines. This is the truth of the matter. And if you are someone who is legitimately concerned about some pornographic material, target the pornographic material. But over and over again in American history, some spook is put out there. Oh, this is an anti-communist pamphlet. Let's shut this down. Oh, this is, and the realm of who is getting their liberties infringed grows greater and greater and greater until we look up and we're having McCarthy trials and the FBI is running ramshod over our country and undermining people's civil liberties.
But this is clearly resonating with parents in Florida. Ron DeSantis
it's not registering across the country
reelected.
Because the Republicans were really hurt by what people perceive to be something. Book banning is deeply unpopular because it's deeply un-American, and Americans know that, which is why we call it parental rights, and people try to sneak it under the radar. And they started to reap the consequences of that in midterms, and we'll see how long this actually takes us. Republicans are overreaching. If they made a more narrow argument, they could be on safe grounds. But they're doing exactly the same that the Democrats did when they thought they had won the culture wars and started taking things too far.
No disagreement that Republicans are overreaching in certain cases. I think the Florida case has been exaggerated a little bit, but
170 books banned. I don't know what to tell you.
Some of these books I don't think are appropriate for.
And do you think all of them are inappropriate? Do you think all 170 books of those?
Some of the books they have shown as examples of things they are trying to take out of
Okay, but that's
schools.
not the question, Robbie, that you're doing that exact same side shuffle. If you think some books should be banned, say, I think that these 5, 10, 15, 20 books should be banned.
I didn't say some books should be banned. I said I find some of them inappropriate.
Okay.
Again, my way to run these schools is to let you decide which school you want to send your kid to, and the school can decide what its library looks like. And if you have a problem with that, you can go to a different school.
That's not what's happening.
That's my policy.
What they've said is that there is a potential $5,000 fine and 5 years in prison for teachers who have a certain kind of material that is not defined found in their classrooms, which is causing teachers to have to preemptively. It's not.
I think it is defined.
The whole point is it's harmful materials to minors, which is incredibly subjective. So teachers are going overboard And,
right, that's what I was saying.
And covering up their books or getting them out of the classroom because they have been basically told, if you make a wrong step, I could literally throw you in jail. So the stance that conservatives want to have, or at least some conservatives, some elected conservatives in the state of Florida want to have, is to say we're going to alienate teachers from their students, the people who spend more time with my kids every day than I do. That we want to say that they are the enemy and that we are going to threaten them with a jail sentence if they mistakenly have a book that some censor somewhere decides violates this new law that we've promulgated. And if that sounds like freedom to you, we're living in two very different Americas.
I've seen the books they were aimed at taking out, and I don't think it would be controversial to not have them there. I don't think that teachers need to go and shut down their entire personal libraries, but if they feel that way, that's unfortunate.
All right.
Well, we'll have to probe this further at a later date. We'll have more Rising right after this.